This gel could turn this desert into a forest. I planted 42 species here last summer and very little grew. Only sorghum and palo verde made it. The desert is brutal on young plants. But with mulch, I got better germination. It showed me how important it is to keep water around. I don't want to rely on drip irrigation forever. I need a better way to store water where plants need it most, underground. The hydrogel can hold up to 400 times its weight in water. Think of it as tiny reservoirs in the soil, so I'm putting it to the test. If this works, I could scale this across the whole ranch. And maybe, just maybe, this gel could turn a desert into a forest. Before I mix hydrogel into the ground, I need to know that this is actually worth my time, because I've already gone through a lot just trying to improve this soil. Last summer, I was paying $80 a yard for manure. I could only haul 3 yards at a time because, at the time, all I had was a Tacoma for towing. Cue the internet critics. Apparently, I should have just bought a bigger truck. As if money or physics don't exist. So I got this, a 4300 International. Problem solved. Yeah? No. Between blown trailer tires, getting stuck, and realizing just how much weight I was pulling, it became clear that I still have a lot to figure out. The big question is, after all that effort, is the manure actually making a big difference? I know it's helping, but how much? I want to experiment with the quantity, not just of the hydrogels, but also the manure. We're trying to learn how much hydrogel do I need to put in the soil at every emitter in order to get the trees to grow. In each spot, whether it's a tree or a grass location, we're going to put the same amount of hydrogel. And then towards the end of the summer, I ought to have a clear idea of how much hydrogel gives me the best bang for my buck. But first, I got to actually figure out what's my experiment area. I'm standing in the first experiment area where Brandon dug a trench and added an enormous amount of biochar into the soil. It's 5%. So the thing that's awesome about biochar is that it's a permanent fix. It enhances the microbial life, but biochar only holds about 3 to 4 times its weight in water. The hydrogel can hold up to 400 times its weight in water, so literally orders of magnitude different. However, the hydrogel also decays in 5 to 7 years. I like the idea of doing permanent amendments. However, 5 to 7 years of extra growth from all that extra water, I don't know what the payoff is going to be, so we're going to mix it up. This is more of this kind of experiment rather than a scientific, oh, this is a control every single variable precisely. That's really just due to the logistics. You saw how hard it was for us to get the manure even out of the trailer. I dumped it quite a bit further away than I anticipated. So this is a balance between trying to learn and what's actually practical for us to do. And the first thing we can go do is stake the end here, which, I mean, really ought to be stupid obvious. This is more of helping me use my rangefinder. Okay, this is not at all precise, but I want to figure out ballpark how many feet it is. 13 yards. I'm pretty excited about realizing the distance is really close to 40 feet because that's what I calculated on my assumptions this morning. I was thinking, how much organic matter did we put in the soil here? And with 1.5 yards of horse manure and all the straw and bedding and everything in there, we've added about 7% organic matter into this soil, which obviously ought to make a huge difference. And between all the mulch, because we went way overkill on this on purpose, I expect this area to do really well. And I'm really excited to start staking out these other areas where we'll do very similar variations, but using different amounts of hydrogel. So I ran the numbers on the soil's organic matter. The goal is to build up water retention and fertility over time, but that's only part of the story. Because at the end of the day, water is still my biggest limiting factor. It always will be. I don't want to haul manure forever. I want to find ways to make the water I do have last longer. That's where hydrogel comes in. But before I start using it, I need to understand exactly why my soil loses water so fast. And that means taking a hard look at some of my worst failures. I knew building a desert forest would be incredibly difficult, but it has been a very public learning curve. Last summer, I planted 42 species, trees, shrubs, perennials, everything that had a chance of surviving out here. I put down thousands of seeds, thinking that some would take. What did I get? A 2% success rate. Almost nothing survived. The only things that actually grew were sorghum and palo verde. So I tried again in the winter. A whole new approach. Cool season annuals, different planting techniques. And for weeks, nothing happened. At this point, I was getting desperate. I had already put in so much work and I had nothing to show for it. And of course, YouTube had plenty of advice. If I had $1 for every time somebody told me what I should have done, there is plenty of those comments in the winter cover crop video. And don't get me wrong, I do get it. People mean well. A lot of commenters don't watch every episode, and they don't have the full context. Meanwhile, I do have experts advising me. I'm working with Syntropic solutions, testing different techniques, and actually learning from each failure. And eventually, not as fast as many would like, I started to see the pattern. After I added mulch, I got much better germination. Not because of the nutrients, but because it kept the soil from drying out so fast. That was my aha moment. The problem isn't just germination, it's water retention. I don't have enough rain to just plant and pray. If I want seeds to germinate, I have to make every drop of water count. And that means fixing the problem below ground. If I poured this water directly on the soil, the water would probably be gone in about an hour. So now I need to figure out exactly how much water my soil holds and how fast it disappears. That's the next step. If I pour this water onto the ground, how long will it actually be available to plants? In sandy loam, the answer is not long. Poured water somewhere over here yesterday. Oh, right here. I can tell because it's kind of stained right here. So this is where I poured the water. Bone dry. Not a trace of moisture. This is what makes seed germination so difficult out here. The moment water hits this soil, it's already disappearing. In a sponge, water stays trapped in tiny air pockets. But in sandy loam, there is nowhere for the water to go but down. This is where gallon hours come in. Instead of just thinking about how much water I add, I need to think about how long that water is available. Let's say I pour 10 gallons into the soil, and after an hour, maybe there's only 6 gallons available. After 2 hours, maybe just 2 gallons. And after 3 hours, almost nothing. But if I add hydrogel and only lose 10% of the water per day, I get 2,275 gallon hours. Instead of using 1,200 gallons of water, I can get the exact same benefit with just 10 gallons. It's a dramatic difference. So it's not at all about adding more water. It's about slowing down the rate of loss in this sandy soil so that the water is available to the plants for a longer period of time. To the extent that it's possible, I want the maximum number of gallon hours. This week's episode is sponsored by Bombas, and because winter's still here, there's no better time to upgrade your cold winter essentials. Bombas merino wool shirts and the merino wool socks are perfect for keeping you warm when it's cold and cool when it's not. Plus, it's soft, it's breathable, and it is never itchy. This is the softest shirt you'll ever wear. These aren't just warm, they stay put, they wick moisture, they resist odors, so you can wear them longer and feel fresher. And with Bombas, you're not just getting great quality, you're giving back. For every item purchased, one item is donated to someone in need. New customers get 20% off of their first purchase. Just go to bombas.com/dustups. Use the promotion code dustups20 to get 20% off of your first order. Again, that's bombas.com/dustups and the promotion code dustups20 to get 20% off of your first order. Stay warm, stay comfy, stay Bombas. I did an experiment 2 years ago where I filled a dirt bathtub with 100 gallons of water. It completely drained in 45 minutes. So if I want seeds to germinate, I don't just need water, I need a way to hold it where plants can use it. And that's where hydrogel comes in. Hydrogel can absorb 400 times its weight in water. It holds on to water and slowly releases it as the soil dries out. After a day, hydrogel is still holding water. That's because the hydrogel is made from polyacrylate, a polymer that breaks down over time, but it doesn't fully disappear. Most of the hydrogel decomposes into water, carbon dioxide and is actual food for soil microbes. They eat it and they poop it. But a very, very small fraction remains as microplastics. It's a trade-off, but I feel like this is the most practical way to implement my values on my budget. An example would be the environmental impact of me driving 6 miles every time we could bring 1,000 gallons of water on every trip. So if I think about how many gallon hours of benefit do I get for having the gel in the ground versus how much diesel I would have to burn to bring the water here in the first place, that has an environmental impact. Which one is worse, burning the diesel and that quantity, or having maybe a fraction of a pound of microplastics in the ground? Everything has a trade-off. I don't plan to use the hydrogel forever. This is a Kickstarter. The goal is to kickstart the growth, not to rely on it over the long term. If these transplanted agave establish roots, they won't need hydrogel at all in a few years. This is about giving them a chance to survive, because if they don't make it past germination, nothing else matters. So I don't just need water, I need water to stick around for the seeds to germinate. But what I want to show you is potentially the longer term opportunity, because I've spoken a lot about learning in the process of how I go, how it drives some of the permaculture people nuts that I haven't just gone crazy making swales. Here's the best advantage for me having taken my time, especially in the context of hydrogels. I'm standing at the base of this terrace, which is about 3 feet tall in this spot. In spots over there, it's more than 6 feet tall. The degradation from the polyacrylate only happens from UV and soil microbial activity. The less oxygen there is, the less degradation there will be. And once you get below 2 feet, effectively, you exponentially retard the time it takes for that material to break down. So look where I am right here. This wall is 5 feet right here. And so this is the learning process in action. What if, as I build the next terraces, we lay the polyacrylate before we even start? So you make the first pass, spread polyacrylate, make the second pass, add polyacrylate, and you do it in layers, not just with polyacrylate, but potentially some of the horse manure. What's kind of a curse out here is the slopes, where I have slopes up to, I'm standing on a 23% slope right now. So I have to build the terraces. And since I have to build the terraces, why pile all these rocks and all this sand when I could be piling polyacrylate, which costs very, very little, and biochar and all these amendments, and I can skip all of this digging? I wouldn't have known that until I started. And in fact, I don't know anybody that's doing that. So I'm really excited to try it on a terrace and estimate the building time. And if we're going to all this trouble, it makes sense to build it perfectly. That polyacrylate could last 50 years, if not hundreds of years. The deeper you go, once you get below 2 feet, every foot you add is potentially adding decades. If you go deep enough, centuries. So what might have a microplastic concern with what I'm doing right now, as I scale and continue to expand the work, that may not actually be a real concern at all. I know hydrogel dramatically slows down the rate of water loss, but the real question is, how much do I need? Too little and it barely makes a difference. Too much, I'm wasting resources. I said I want to do at least 1, 2, 3, 4 experiments, and because I have 141 feet divided by 4, 35 feet per experiment. That's a good amount. It's comparable to what I did in the first stretch. So we're going to go with 35 feet for these 4 experiments, where we're going to do the same biochar, a ton of horse manure, and then we're going to add the hydrogel and see how we do. The first thing I need to do is an experiment in this room. I need to know how many grams of hydrogel do I need in order to hold a liter of water, or 10 liters or whatever. That can be affected by water quality. I will be hydrating this water with water from the well, so I'm going to test with my well water. I'll just add way too much water and then pour out all the extra water and weigh it. 20 grams of hydrogel. 1 liter. 2 liters. I think I'm going to try to put in 8 liters, which I think should be way too much. Because I did 8 liters, which is roughly about 2 gallons. And I'd like to make a gallon of water and have about half of it left. It should be somewhere in the ballpark of 50 grams. Just a little bit under a gallon is what this should hold. So I'm going to add another 30 more grams to my experiment, but by putting double, if it's able to hold more, I give it the opportunity to. So now it's got 50 grams of hydrogel. I'm going to let it sit for over an hour just so it has its complete best opportunity to succeed, and then we'll come back and measure. Spreading material with a bulldozer is pretty common, but it happens to be my first time doing it. I've only used the bulldozer for about 100 hours, and all of that has been cut and fill. I've never needed to spread, so you're watching me awkwardly try to figure this out. This is the very beginning. The final product looked considerably better than this. You'll see it on the ground, but this is me figuring it out. A bulldozer is clearly not the ideal tool for spreading manure. A manure spreader behind a tractor would be, but my dozer doesn't have a PTO, and I don't quite have the budget yet to get a tractor and various implements, although that is definitely on the wish list. I did the best I could, but now that experiment area is ready, I'll have to go back up there and measure because it's not even, and I'd rather go where I know the manure is pretty concentrated. So we'll redo that, adjust my experiment design. But first, let's make sure the hydrogel is doing what we expect. We would expect the 50 grams that I used to make roughly 3.5 liters of water, just about there. We're going to pour all that water out to separate the gel. And then once the gel's separated, we'll measure the quantity of water and see how we did. It seems like more than half hydrated, but we'll measure. And since we are not doing a scientific experiment, I just want to make sure that I got 95% of it. I believe I have accomplished that. Holy cow. This is all the water that's left, which means that we hydrated over 6 liters of water, which is just phenomenal. So I'll calculate exactly what the yield is. 2.75 bottles was exactly what was left. 2 2/3. To keep things simple, I'm hydrating all of it in an IBC, which is a big water tote. The gel needs 550 liters of water to fully expand, and doing it in bulk will save me time. Once the hydrogel absorbs the water, it's ready to go. I could mix this dry straight into the soil, but that is not ideal. The gel expands unpredictably, which can push seeds to the surface and disturb roots. Also, if I'm going to the trouble of mixing it, why not just mix it while it's wet? Prehydrating it ensures even distribution, and it prevents the soil from shifting while providing consistent moisture to encourage germinations. This is the first real test, because if the hydrogel works the way I think it will, I can expand this across the entire ranch. Now that the hydrogel is ready, it's time to get it into the ground. The goal here is simple. Get it in the ground, we'll come back during planting time and mix it, but to prevent water loss, we're going to cover it with hay so that the water's there when we need it. Instead of just dumping it on top, I'm placing it directly in the planting zone so that the roots can access the moisture as they grow as early in their life as possible. That is insane. The gel only costs about 8 cents per gallon, and it'll last 5 or 7 years. Now, obviously, the plants are absorbing it, but also it can be replenished either by drip irrigation or by rain. It makes sense to go bonkers with this gel and just figure out what's the right capacity to use in the soil for growing grass, for growing agave, and growing trees. And that's the whole purpose of this experiment. And now I have actual data based on my live experience, which is awesome. As I can tell looking right here, this is clearly amended. I don't know if it's going to come out on camera, but I can see the little bits of straw and the color is just a little bit different. There are some streaks and the level of amendment is different in this section. I intentionally didn't put the dozer blade down here because we have buried water line and really don't want to ruin my irrigation system, but kind of to here it's certainly patchy, but even in this section here where it's clearly a lighter color than over here, it's all amended. Like, it looks the same color as the soil where it's very heavily amended over where Brandon planted everything. So I'll show you this. And then I guess this stretch closer to him is just super amended. Like hyper amended. I'm going to mark what I think is the end of the experiment area and remeasure based on what I can see is heavily amended soil. Just put it up here where it's easy to see. I don't know if I'll be able to get through this soil though. Not going to survive a cow leaning on it, but that's good enough. Nope. Man. The reason the distance isn't so important is that I'll have the water step in a certain direction. So as I'm testing the trees, I'll have the hydration start from a max there and then decrease as we go that way. And then with the grass, I'll start with the minimum on the opposite side and increase as we go this way. The goal is just to look, and it should look like a giant stripe, like, wow, the trees are really going better as you go that way. Or, wow, the grass is really getting better as you go that way. We want to know, how good can it get? For now, I'm kind of stuck because we have to have all the whole area prepped before we put any tree seeds or grass seeds in the ground. And we'll be driving over it with trailers and heavy equipment, and we absolutely do not want to have seeds that we might disturb. What's going to happen while I'm gone, Daniel and Brandon are going to go get wood chips from El Paso. It's a long drive. We don't need tons and tons of wood chips, but compared to the time spent gathering material, it's really smart to use that 4300 and haul a lot of weight, and we'll just line the wood chips up where we know we're going to lay the mulch. And especially having seen it visually, I think that'll cover just about this whole stretch. And then we will have to go buy some hay so that we can get that spread. Once that's done, we'll come back here with the auger and hydrated gel, and we will get the holes in the planting sites ready and staked so we know where to put the seeds. And then we're ready for the summer and the peak growing season. It's about a month too early to plant anything, but because this hydrogel works so well, I can come back next month and plant the seeds when the timing is best. And finally, mulch. We already saw how much of a difference this makes above ground. Now we're reinforcing that effect underground. This keeps the soil from baking in the sun and slows down evaporation. That's it. The hard part is done. Now we just need to add the seeds in about a month. If this works, these seeds will have a fighting chance, and if it doesn't, I have to go back to the drawing board. So was it worth it? We will soon find out. Everything's in the ground. The hydrogel's in place, the seeds go in the ground next month, and the mulch is protecting all of that water from evaporation. Now we wait. If this works, we should start seeing germinations a couple of weeks after planting. The hydrogel will hold the moisture, keeping the seeds hydrated long enough to sprout and continue to grow. And once they sprout, the goal is to get them established before the worst of the heat kicks in. If enough of these make it, this could be a scalable way to plant across the entire ranch. But this isn't a guaranteed success. There are plenty of ways that this could still fail. If the hydrogel doesn't retain water long enough, the young germinations will dry out before they get established. Or if we don't put down enough mulch to protect the surface, the soil could still bake in the sun. And the worst case is I've spent time and resources on something that doesn't work, but even then, I'll have more knowledge of what to tweak next time. This whole project isn't about getting a few seeds to sprout. It's about proving that desert afforestation is possible, specifically with a syntropic approach. If I can make it work here with this soil in this climate, then it's possible almost anywhere. And if I fail, I'm not going to completely fail. I feel like this is pretty close to the worst case scenario, what I've endured, and yet there's still progress. So I think this is the model that if you have a really bad year, you take a hard look at what went wrong and you make sure you do better. So I can take some severe abuse and keep on going. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment, hit the like button, and we will absolutely be following up on the success of this as soon as there are germinations, but obviously we have to plant first. We'll be back at you with more.